So did your family know?
Some knew, immediate family. My wife knew because I met her in the agency. Now she was open. I was undercover and she was open. So we had to come up with a cover story as to how we even met. Then turns out the director of CIA came to my wedding and we had to come up with a cover story why he was at the wedding.
Why don't you tell us what does a CIA officer do?
There are the intelligence analysts, those that analyze and interpret the intelligence gathered in the field. And then within the Directorate of Operations, that's where people think of quote unquote spies, the case officers and those that are working in the field. So depending on what your assignment is, and I was in the Office of Security, which at that time was part of the Directorate of Administration. It's now renamed the Directorate of Support. And even within an office such as mine, there were multiple career paths that you could take. So at any given time during my career, I had a different assignment, different roles, different responsibilities. So we'd have to drill down a little bit more as to what would be the typical work day for someone.
Yeah, I'm sure it runs the very wide gamut. We'll get into specifics for yourself. How many CIA employees roughly do you think there are?
Well, if I could tell you, so A, I don't know exactly, and B, it's a classified number. The agency has never actually disclosed how many
Okay,
employees there are within the agency. Unfortunately, I can't throw a number out there for you.
that's fine. That's fine. Obviously, by your description, we're definitely in the thousands for sure.
Well, yeah, certainly.
So I find it interesting that you said corporation because I know that I've heard the CIA has created companies occasionally in order to accomplish whatever mission it is they want to do.
Yeah, absolutely. And this was something that happened after my time in the agency, but they did have, and I think they probably still do, have almost like a venture capital type arm that is working with companies in Silicon Valley and others to, seed companies as they look into developing interesting technology that might be applicable to the agency down the road.
Right. That makes sense. So what about yourself? How did you get hired and why did you choose to do this?
So I think your listeners and viewers are going to see this can be almost like opening a time capsule because I'm going way back to the mid 1980s. So when I graduated from school in San Diego with a political science degree, knew I wanted to work in the government, was applying for a bunch of different roles. Now, back then, it was a little different than today. I actually walked into the Career Center, pulled a file off of the wall that said Central Intelligence Agency, and looked at various options they had, one of which was Office of Security. Looking at that, it seemed interesting. I went back to my apartment and I'm sure I broke out a typewriter and typed a letter. And there were no computers back then, and sent it off, not knowing if I'd ever hear anything. Eventually, I was contacted by Mr. Jones, which I assumed had to have been a pseudonym. Turns out it wasn't. His real name really was Jones.
He fits his role
And then,
perfectly.
yeah, exactly. And then that let me down a very long, lengthy process, which is still how it takes right now of a full 15-year background investigation, polygraph examination, psychological examinations, all of that. So it's quite a lengthy process once you begin. Back then, it was probably 9 or 10 months, and I'm sure it's probably about the same now.
Okay. So the current, I don't know how much you know about the current hiring process. You think it's a pretty similar process
It'd
that
be
everyone
very,
goes through?
very similar. Obviously, everything's done online now, and there's a much different process as far as intake goes. But the necessary requirements to do full 15-year background investigation still apply. So that is every place you've lived over the last 15 years. The schools you've attended, the jobs you've had, all of that is fully investigated. The investigators that go out, in my case, I was one of them once I got hired to develop informants, not just talk to the people that you listed, but develop other people that knew you to gather as much information as possible. So it's, like I said, it's your entire background, plus then what happens when you're brought to headquarters for the polygraph examinations, psychological examinations, those type of things. And of course, also depending on what your role would be. Some of those are, the polygraph and the background investigation happens to everybody. But then what other skill sets you might have depending on your role. You would definitely have additional training once you got on board, and then also could be some additional screening to make sure you have the right temperament and acuity and all that to be able to live in some very challenging situations, especially if you're within the director of operations and living and working overseas.
Right. Is there anything that comes to mind where you would say it would be an immediate disqualification for somebody when they go through the
Well,
process?
so again, when I went through it, even the questions were different than they are today. Back then, there were, any type of drug use would be immediately disqualifying. I think nowadays they probably dance around cannabis use and things like that because it's legal in a lot of different places. So, but back then, any type of drug use was almost immediately disqualifying. Um, Again, I'm dating myself tremendously, but there were polygraph examination questions that back in the mid 80s, they would ask us, they were called lifestyle questions that they can't ask now because there was concern if you led a certain type of lifestyle, you could be blackmailed by the Soviets, et cetera, et cetera. That no longer really applies. So they don't even ask those type of questions anymore. And then there are the rest of the investigations are all still fairly similar, wanting to make sure that you don't have, relationships with foreign nationals that could be compromising and things like that, that they really want to dig into.
Yeah. Okay. So you were undercover for, I guess,
I
most of
was.
your career with them. I think we have an idea of what that means, but would you like to expand on what that meant to you?
Well, only a very small. So everyone thinks, well, if you're in the CIA, you're undercover. Well, that's not the case. Only a very small number of CIA employees are undercover, um, and so it is what it sounds like. I was not acknowledged. As a matter of fact, as I worked my way through the hiring process, at a certain point, when it seemed fairly likely that I was going to be hired, they told me to tell everyone I didn't get the job. And then when I did get a job, that the cover story would be, no longer I was working for the CIA. It was whatever my cover happened to be at the time. So I was going into a position where I knew I was going to be undercover. Like I said, the vast majority of employees don't have that constraint. So then my cover would change based on what my roles and responsibility were every couple of years throughout.
So did your family know?
Some knew, immediate family. My wife knew because I met her in the agency. Now she was open. I was undercover and she was open. So we had to come up with a cover story as to how we even met. And then turns out the director of CIA came to my wedding and we had to come up with a cover story why he was at the wedding because I wasn't an agency employee, so we spun it around saying that he knew Beth and Beth knew her. And that's, he was a guest of my wife's, not a guest of mine.
All right. What about pay? I'm assuming this is a typical G scale type pay,
Yeah,
or is there
GS
something
is
else?
GS pay scale. When again, I'm dating myself, but when I started, I was a GS7 step one, making $17,500 a year, and couldn't spend it enough. I had more money than I could ever do anything with because I was single and living alone and all that. I looked it up because I knew the question was coming. I think currently a starting GS7 is like 42,000 a year. So this is not a career like many government careers. This is not one where somebody is going to go take it for the money. You're not going to get rich working for the government in any capacity. Now that's the base pay scale. The scale slides based on the cost of living in wherever you're assigned, domestically or internationally. So there's overtime and some things like that. So that's the base level, I think, the GS7. So I started as a GS7. I left as a 13, I think, and which I think a 13 now is maybe 95,000 a year, something like that.
Is there a person you would say that this job is not for, or maybe for?
It's not for someone like we were just talking about, someone who feels like they have to brag and tell everyone about what they do and all that, because especially if you're in any type of operational capacity, your wins go unnoticed, your losses become major headlines, so you have to You have to live with the fact that there aren't going to be accolades for what we do. And it's, it's difficult, rigorous work, no matter what you do. If you're an analyst, you're reviewing raw intel coming in and trying to make the right call in the right situation to get the right information to the policymakers. So it's important work, it's difficult work, but not one that, someone who wants to be able to brag about what they do, should be involved in, I don't think.
Yeah. All right. So I guess you were trained at Camp Peary, also known as the farm. Can you talk
I was
about
trained at
what?
I was trained at the farm. The agency has never formally stated where the farm is located, so I can neither confirm nor deny the location of where the farm is. But yeah, so I, along with many others, have trained at covert training bases that the agency has set up in various places for specific skill sets.
Okay. Um, and then as far as what types of training or things that you might have been trained on, can you talk about anything about
Yeah. So
what they
again,
did with you?
it depends on what your it depends on what your assignment was. When I was there, so I was within the Office of Security. I had a number of different roles that I can talk about. I was a field investigator, so I was the person out there doing investigations on people that were of interest to the agency, either looking to hire in or working on classified programs with classified defense contractors, things like that. Then I spent a large part of my career on the director's protective staff. So specifically for protective operations, I spent quite a long time down at the farm doing a lot of different type of training scenarios there. All type of protective operations, vehicle dynamics training, high speed driving training, things like that, weapons training, of course. And then we would train in counter surveillance and surveillance detection, the whole litany of hard skills that you need for if you're going to be working in hostile areas overseas and otherwise.
Interesting. So yeah, we had a gentleman on before. He was a DEA agent on one of the other episodes, and he talked. It almost sounds like the training is fairly similar that he went through the way you just described it.
Yeah, I'm sure it is because the DEA has within their realm of responsibility, they have people that are assigned to certain type of activities and roles and responsibilities, just like we did. So yeah, I mean, they would have people that are being trained on investigations, just like we did. So on our team, we had where we would train on how to do a very long, complex investigation. And then if your job rolled into protective ops like mine did, then it was all of those hard skills in order to have a complete comprehensive unit, ready to go when needed.
Yeah, and I'm curious what you meant. If we back up for a sec, you said you were more of in defensive. I'm having trouble thinking of what that really means. Can you kind of expand on that?
Well, I can't remember what, are you referring to when I said defensive driving or?
No, more of a protectionist type role.
So no, I was on the director's protective staff. So I was,
Okay.
think the Secret Service of, although we hated that comparison, the Secret Service of the agency. So we protected the director and deputy director and their families. And I was on that. I had that role for 5 or 6 years, I think.
Okay. So protecting them as in there's usually someone who I guess physically making sure they're okay and looking
Yeah.
out
So
over
as
their
they,
property.
yeah. So as they have, and I can't get into, well, it's changed a lot over the years, but they would have a full protective detail, just like, especially as the world has changed so much over recent years, a full protective detail to protect them and their family against any type of external threat, either from, a you know, foreign adversary, or more and more against domestic threats. And so it's everything from protecting their homes and they're protecting them en route to back and forth to meetings and offices, and obviously on CIA property as well. And then any type of traveling overseas.
Okay, what about work-life balance? How'd that go?
So again, the vast majority of agency personnel are 9 to 5 jobs, right? Mine never were. I was, apropos to the topic or to the title of your podcast, I worked shift work during all those years on the protective staff. We would rotate through an early shift, an afternoon shift, and a midnight shift. So So that obviously, as you and all of your listeners would be familiar with, that causes some strain on the family. Now, I had when I when I first started, I was single and didn't have any responsibilities. So I could do whatever I wanted and needed to. When I got married, my wife understood because she was in and she understood that what she was getting into when I disappeared for 3 weeks before the wedding on overseas assignments. And she got stuck doing all the last minute planning because I was running around the world doing what I had to do.
Interesting. So what about stress? Do you feel like you were under the average amount of stress doing this work, or
So
higher than normal?
the roles that I had could be very stressful because in a protective operations sense, you have to be right every single time. Now, the bad guy only has to be right once. We have to be right every single time. And you've seen it in what's happened recently with some of the attacks on politicians and whatnot, where, if you lose focus or you don't have the right resource in the right place or you miss the person up on a rooftop or something like that, it could have dire consequences. So in that regard, when you're talking about protective operations, yeah, that's high stress. When you're talking about, I did a lot of investigative work, and the stress was there to make sure that, I didn't miss anything in a background investigation that might lead to someone being given access to classified information improperly, so that there's a lot of stress involved in that. And then just the normal stress of traveling around the world, doing all kinds of fun and interesting things. It wasn't all of my assignments have never been typical 9 to 5 work, but the vast majority of agency employees didn't have those same type of stressors.
Yeah. And when you say investigative work, you said, I think you said most of it would be on other CIA employees, kind of a
Well,
thing.
yes and no. So initially, when I was doing investigations, I was doing investigations on those that were looking to join the agency. So just like I had been prior to that, or were looking to have to get a security clearance because they worked for a defense contractor that had a contract with the agency. So I would do those type of background investigations. And then as the career progressed, I didn't do it, but had I gone into polygraphy, then the polygraphers are doing their type of investigations, either on new hires or in service reinvestigation type polygraphs, things like that. And then there were parts of our organization that are the adjudication branch, and so they were adjudicating the investigations that came in and making those decisions. So there's a wide range of ways that someone from the Office of Security in my era would have gotten involved in all sorts of different investigatory activities.
Do you think that the roles that you were given are in any way related to the CIA believing you to be quite trustworthy, perhaps more trustworthy than an average employee? I
No,
guess I'm
not at
trying to
all.
figure. Okay.
No, I think, I mean, well, first of all, everything's done by a need to know basis. So everyone has a certain baseline top secret security clearance to be working, to be able to walk through and have a blue badge and walk through the front door. Then everything else is siloed by need to know. So I could have, the same security clearance as you, but if we're working on different projects, we don't discuss. I don't have a need to know what you're working on. You don't have a need to know what I'm working on. And then based on my job responsibilities and my skill set, sure, I was doing certain things as a protective agent that someone who wasn't trained in, protective operations or firearms or defensive driving or anything like that, counterterrorism driving, they obviously wouldn't have our role because they didn't have the same skill sets for what we are doing. But in general, everyone has the same security clearance. And then above that are different code word clearances for specific types of projects that, again, you wouldn't share with somebody that wasn't read in on that specific project.
So it seems obvious, though, that you were given a skill set, you were taught certain things, but they must have seen something in you that said to them, they thought, well, we'll teach him this skill set. He'll be good at this.
Well, yeah, during the hiring process, obviously. So I wasn't just applying for any regular job. I was applying for a job that I knew the career path could lead to, protective operations, let's say. Now, if early in my career they said, well, he doesn't seem to have the right temperament or whatnot to be able to handle interacting with the highest level of the agency, then you're right. I wouldn't have been given that assignment. So yes, to your point, a lot of the assignments I got were based on my track record and other things that I had done. The fact that they felt that I could interact with the director on a daily basis, and the deputy director and senior leaders and congressmen and the White House and everything else. So yeah, you have to have the right temperament to handle some of these assignments.
Yeah. Okay. I know we mentioned it before. So you met your wife in the agency. How'd that all go down?
It's a bone of contention between us. She swears I walked up to her and said, "Hi, I'm Scott. You should know me." I swear I didn't. I walked up to her and said, "Hi, I'm Scott. We haven't met yet." I was on the, I was on the seventh floor. So the CIA, the seventh floor is where the senior leaders are. And I was outside the director's suite on protective detail. She worked in the office of protocol. So she would come in to lead the director and deputy director off to whatever meetings they needed to go to. So we worked closely, the DCI staff, the director staff, with the protocol office and all that. And I just noticed her and introduced myself. And then I figured if she's working there, then she's got a top secret security clearance. She's got a full background investigation. This is long before internet dating. So the agency had basically vetted her for me. I said, okay, she can't, more than likely is not a mass murderer. So we went from there.
So do you think the agency prefers people to get together who?
No, I'm sure they don't. No. And we had to, you have to report relationships like everything else. And we have additional, issues that you and your career or some of your listeners and viewers in their career wouldn't have. If all of a sudden I started dating a woman from, any foreign nation, I would have to report that. And possibly be told you can't date her, or lose your job, So they were very strict on having any type of relationship with foreign nationals. So in that regard, I didn't have to worry about that either. But no, I don't think the agency cares one way or the other as long as we're all doing our jobs.
Yeah. Did you ever know anyone who tried to keep something on the lowdown as far as maybe a relationship or something?
Personally, no, but it's the history of the agency is rife with people that were hiding things. Some of the spies that came out later, spies like Aldrich Ames and others, were hiding relationships with foreign nationals that they didn't disclose and then weren't picked up on the polygraph reinvestigations and things like that. We had and still have there, I'm sure, multiple rings of security around to try and uncover these type of situations. And sometimes things slip through.
Okay, can you share any stories about assignments that you had that you might be able to talk about?
Yeah, within the context of some of the assignments I had. So, a lot of my more interesting overseas assignments were based on when I was on the protective staff and running around the world with various directors. I started the very first director I covered was Bill Casey. And he was definitely a character. He scared the heck out of me. The very first time I worked with him, I was a rookie agent in a field office, domestic field office. He was doing a domestic visit. So I was pulling an overnight shift and he popped out at like 3 a.m. into the command post, asking for something. And the guy mumbled terribly and I had no idea what he was talking about. And thankfully a senior agent walked in at the last second and he wanted his briefcase. So I gathered up his briefcase and gave it to him. He was a real interesting guy. He was a voracious reader. One of the things that we always had to plan on when we were covering him was to have, again, this is back in the day, have a pocket full of cash. So he would want to go into a bookstore and we'd just be pulling books off the shelf and things like that and handing us off to him. So domestically, our work did everything from protecting the principals in a mundane situation like that to protecting the principals when we were out visiting Mujahideen training camps during the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan, and how we were pushing back against that and supporting the Mujahideen. And if you or any of your viewers and listeners have seen Charlie Wilson's War with Tom Hanks. It's about that very specific time when the agency was gearing up and trying to support, the Mujahideen in their fight against the Soviets. And that's when, I was involved in things like that and going out to some of these training camps and watching these folks train on weapons that were being provided to them to be able to then go and push back against the Soviets, which was some interesting times.
AK-47s, is that what they were using a lot of? Or?
That was a very, very minimum. At that point we were assisting with various type of RPGs and shoulder fired missiles for bringing down Hind helicopters and all of those type of things.
Yeah. Interesting. And when you said he liked to go to bookstores?
That was Casey. So
do you mean we're talking outside of the United States? So you'd be trying
anywhere we had him, but he was very early on in my career, and then he passed away. Then, I was there during the transition from him to several other directors. Bob Gates was a deputy director and then later a director, and Judge Webster was one of our directors. So most of my time on the protective staff was not with Casey. That was early on.
I see. Okay. Any other assignments that you can talk about that you had?
Well, I'm sure there will be other things that pop up as we chat, but basically, most of my work I could talk about without getting into specifics about the who, what, when, where type things, or the specific programs and whatnot. But generally, it was investigative work early on, protective operations after that, then program work where I was responsible for protecting classified programs that were being jointly developed with defense contractors and things along those lines before I decided that it was time to transition to another role.
During any of your roles or assignments, were you ever scared? Do you ever have any moments?
Yeah, there are plenty of opportunities for that. I was in a helicopter choppering along the Thai-Cambodian border, and all of a sudden a bunch of bells and whistles and warning buzzers went off, and because somebody locked in an anti-aircraft missile battery on us. So that was interesting, and we decided it was a good idea to get out of there. There were occasions when there's one incident. The closest I ever came to discharging my weapon was in one of these Mujahideen training camps. We were taking a tour through a specific part of the area, and I was on point. And we found out later they were trying to demonstrate how stealthy they could be and whatnot. One of their fighters jumped out of a spider hole not too far in front of me without telling us they were going to do this. Jumped up with an AK-47, yelling Allahu Akbar and things like that. But they hadn't warned us this was coming. So now the only thing that saved this guy, because I immediately drew down on him with my rifle, was he was holding his AK-47 horizontally instead of vertically right at me. He was holding it up in one hand. But I had 4.5 pounds of pressure on a 5-pound trigger at that point. And then we had some very sharp words for the liaison team.
Imagine
why don't do that to us. Yeah, no, it was a very bad idea.
Got this great idea. We're going to
we're going to scare the security guy. Don't do that.
It's going to be amazing.
So it's like any police officer or firefighter or military will tell you it's 99% boredom with the 1% of, and like your job, right? You're doing your job as high stress as it is, and God forbid, you have, all of a sudden planes are intersecting on your scope, and then things get stressful. No, most of the time it was fairly routine.
Yeah. Everything's fine until it isn't, pretty much.
Right, exactly.
How it goes, right. Okay. So I know you mentioned Aldrich Ames before. I know I'm showing here he was arrested in 94 for being a mole who sold out CIA operations to the Soviets.
Yeah.
And he was active.
He was active when I was there. I think he started well before me. He had a long career, not distinguished. And so when these things are going on inside the agency, as I mentioned before, everything is very much protected and need to know. So those that were hunting in the counterintelligence team that were hunting and looking for spies, quote unquote, wouldn't be, walking through and talking about it in the cafeteria. You don't really know this whole thing is going on. There's small teams that are assigned to, hey, we're losing whatever the leak is. Either we're losing agents in the field, those that were working for us, in we're getting wrapped up, or certain things were happening to make us think we have a leak, and then they have to start working their way through it. So I wasn't aware of it during the time I was there. After it happened, of course, I started doing research on it, and things were missed. People made mistakes. I think I mentioned, he was hiding relationships with foreign nationals. He was in debt way over his head. He did manage to beat the polygraph, 2 in-service polygraphs during the period. I think they found out he started actually working with the Soviets in like 85, didn't get wrapped up until 94 or something like that. So it's a long process of trying to figure out, hey, we've got a problem, then who is it, and then work your way investigating to try and find it. So the average agency employee wouldn't have been aware that it was going on. I certainly wasn't until after.
Interesting. Okay. What about Iran-Contra affair? Do you have any opinions
Yeah,
on that?
I literally dodged a bullet on that one. I was in a domestic field office, one of my early assignments doing background investigations. I was young, I was single. I'd been asked to go to be part of the director of security staff, which I mentioned earlier, which I'd immediately signed up for. And then before I deployed, I got tapped on the shoulder saying, hey, we have an opportunity for a security officer assignment in Tegucigalpa, Honduras. Do you want that? And again, young, single, unaccompanied. Yeah, sign me up. I'm there. And they said, okay. So I was going on that assignment. And then at the last second, somewhere in the career board said, yeah, but it's a GS 13 assignment. This kid's only I think it was a 7 or an 8 at the time. We really shouldn't. It became a bureaucratic thing that stopped me from going to Tegucigalpa. It's a long-winded answer to, had I gone, I would have ended up sitting right next to Ollie North and all these other folks in front of Congress, because it was that job in that assignment that was working the whole Iran-Contra program out of Honduras that was supporting the Contras in Nicaragua and all of that. So, but for a bureaucratic hurdle of I wasn't the right pay grade, I would have been right in the middle of the whole Iran-Contra mess.
Yeah.
So
Now,
thankfully I dodged that one.
Yeah, and did the incident affect internal operations of the CIA? Was there any blowback on that?
Well, it's like any time that the agency is exposed in having, something gone wrong, because as I said earlier, our victories aren't celebrated. It's only our defeats where they might become national news. So yeah, that can become somewhat disheartening at times, I guess, to know that the agency is under attack. That was initially more of a political headache for the president and all of that. And then it worked down to, what was the agency's involvement. But, it would have been more of a direct impact on just the morale of, okay, here we go again. There's something going on that's just distracting us from doing what our mission is.
Hey, quick time out. I just want to say that if you'd like to come on the show, email me at talesfromtheshiftpodcast@gmail.com. We'll talk about your shift. I know there is a TV show called The Recruit. It's fairly recent on Netflix. Have you seen it? Do you have an opinion on it?
I have, and you and I had discussed previously, another show I think was called The Americans that I didn't watch. Just much like, many police officers or military or doctors don't watch shows of that genre because they're all wildly inaccurate. I never watched The Americans kind of for that reason, but The Recruit I watched and I enjoyed tremendously, really for one specific reason, and that is Adam Sarowski, who wrote it, produced it, is a former agency employee. He was an attorney, so hence the main protagonist of the story is a brand new CIA attorney, and then what happens to him is wildly inaccurate, probably. But the part that I particularly enjoyed about the show is his was one of the few, through whatever contacts he had, that actually filmed on campus in Langley. So when they show him, the characters walking through the iconic main lobby with the CIA seal on the granite floor and all that, and the memorial wall, and the stars etched in and things like that. That's really shot on campus, which really doesn't happen very often. So whenever I see a show that is on and they've got some stylized version of the CIA symbol, which means they didn't get a authority to do it, that's one thing, and I don't like the just because of that. But then the fact that they were filming actually on site, and you can see things that it's just a glimpse into what real life is like at the agency. There's a crypto statue in the middle center courtyard. It's kind of an S-shaped statue that represents cryptography, and there's hidden messages in it, and that's in one of them, in one of the episodes. And he and I were talking at one point, and he's right before season 2 launched, and he said, well, you're the only one that's going to appreciate this. We shot in the lobby, and I said, I know where you're going with this, but not the main lobby. We shot in the lobby for the new headquarters building. Again, that's something to just geek out, agency people say, oh yeah, that's these guys really have access because they filmed this in a place that no one else would ever film it. So then the story was very entertaining. Not 100% accurate, but it was an entertaining story.
Yeah. You made me think of how Marines, I know they tend to say, once a Marine, always a Marine.
Right.
And it sounds like in your career, once a CIA
it's
always a CIA employee.
It's kind of always former, never ex, and it's been helpful in my career before, because when I left the agency and started my global security career, at one point I got a call from the chief of station in New York City. He said, I'd like to meet with you. I said, great, happy to do it. He said, and so I went down and met with him. And he said, I understand you're going to Moscow. And I said, yeah, I'm trying to think of how he knew. Then I remembered I'd mentioned it to one of my buddies who was still in, that I was going to Moscow. It was going to be my first trip to Moscow, because when I was in the agency, I wasn't allowed to go. For those different roles, different assignments, etc. Sometimes you can't go to certain places. And I must have mentioned to him that I was going. He, in turn, got some intel and fed it back to the chief of station in New York. Anyway, he asked me, he said, we're highly suggesting you don't go to Moscow. And I said, okay, any reason why? He said, well, the FBI recently wrapped up a former KGB officer who was retired, and it was now the Russians. The Russians are losing their minds over it, and they're threatening to arrest the next former agency guy that wanders into Moscow. And, oh, by the way, that's you. And I said, okay, good to know. I have no interest in spending the winter in Lubyanka prison. So I canceled my trip. I said, I'm not going. And then, I don't know, 4, 5, 6 months later, he calls me up. I went back in to meet him. He said, okay, you're good to go. He said, we resolved it. The Bureau let the guy go. Russians have calmed down. You're probably good to go in. And I was a little nervous when I finally eventually went. I went two times after that. Yeah, so that's a situation where it was nice to have somebody still looking over my shoulder a little bit.
Yeah. And then when you did the Office of Security, what would you say was one of the biggest threats you ever had to deal with in that role?
Well, so the main overarching threat, the Office of Security is there to protect the agency against all threats, period, end of story. So that's everything from physical security around the building, the main headquarters complex. It was I was still there when Miramal Kanzi attacked a number of agency employees, regular agency employees, just trying to go to work that morning at a stoplight in Langley out front of the Chain Bridge Road. And he walked down the line of cars making a left-hand turn and shot him up, killed 2 CIA employees, wounded maybe 3, wounded several others. So you had those type of threats, existential threats to the agency just from physical terrorism type things. The threat of somebody penetrating the agency, trying to get in and, being able to get access to classified information. So that was an ongoing threat. And then drilling down more specifically, when I was on protective operations, the threat against your principal, you want to make sure that it's a little mercenary, but it's kind of like the old saying, you don't have to be faster than the bear. You just have to be faster than, the guy next to you and outrun him. So the bear catches that. Right. Same thing in protective operations. If somebody's looking to attack a government official, we wanted to be too hard to hit. The agency guys are too hard to hit. We're going to go after the State Department. We're going to go after whoever, right? Obviously, the president's the hardest. He's got the most resources and all that. Make it that much harder. They're not going to go after your guy. They're going to go after somebody else. But if there was a specific threat against our people, then, you had to make sure that, okay, we have a time and place predictable movement. What are we going to do? What countermeasures are we going to put in place? If we have to be somewhere, how are we going to, just like what the Secret Service does, how are we going to, put the right resources in place to mitigate the threat?
So some people say that the CIA answers to nobody and operates above the law. What do you have an opinion on this?
Yeah, I do. And it's definitely not true. I mean, I can't tell you how many congressional hearings I was taking our leadership to just during the time I was there. And there are so many levels of congressional oversight and budgetary purse strings and all of that kind of thing that, like I said, it operates just like any corporation with oversight of a board of directors or whatnot. The agency's oversight is with Congress. And since I've left, there's even different because the agency is now part of the DNI, the Director of National Intelligence, his or her overall scope. So there's now another level of intelligence oversight just above the agency that doesn't even involve Congress or anybody else. It's certainly not one. I'm not one that's a conspiracy theorist about deep state activities and that type of thing. Sure, every bureaucracy has entrenched bureaucrats that are just trying to save their own positions and all that. But it was never even a consideration that the agency was running rogue or doing things like that were above the law. I'm sure there were specific individuals or cases where somebody would do something wrong or go rogue in on a specific, even for the, thinking they're doing it for the right reasons. But I was never under the impression that there was some, hidden Illuminati that are running things
Okay.
outside the government,
Okay. So, I mean, I guess it is a little conspiratorial to say that I've heard people say that they think the CIA is more powerful than the president. It sounds like you would say that's not the case.
No, I mean, we have, obviously the agency had impressive resources, but they were all being used to support the government and the National Command Authority and all of that. So no, I wouldn't say that the agency was more, by any stretch, more powerful than certainly not the president or any other government agency.
Okay. So the whole so the JFK thing, you don't think that the CIA was involved in?
No, I don't think that, the agency, again, having been in and knowing the complexities of the classified code word programs that I was involved in and the difficulty of maintaining the security of very strongly focused classified programs, to say that there was this massive conspiracy to bring down the Twin Towers and, disappear 3,000 people that, or when there's a school shooting and people think that there are crisis actors at play and there really weren't a bunch of kindergartners killed. That's just nonsense. That's just not the way the world works. And some people say, "Oh, Scott, you're being naive." No, I was in. I know the difficulty of doing these things, and to have some conspiracy that is that wide ranging is just not feasible.
All right. So I have a question here from one of our viewers. It says, if a CIA officer receives a subpoena from Congress, what is the protocol and who do they inform?
Well, so just like I said, there is a very robust Office of the General Counsel in the agency. So there are teams of lawyers. Had I ended up on that Tegucigalpa assignment, I would have been intimately familiar with what to do when you're pulled in front of Congress. And luckily I wasn't. So just like I would in a corporate environment, if I'm called, you coordinate with legal and you go through the entire process. Now, if you've done something wrong, and then that's a whole nother story. If you personally are being investigated for criminal activity or something like that, then that goes a whole different direction. But if you're doing your job, you're being subpoenaed because of X, Y, or Z type thing, then then you're just working with the Office of General Counsel and, figuring out the right legal response to, to whoever's making the inquiry.
So looking back at the time that you spent in the CIA, is there any moment, I mean, you use the word cool, I suppose, where you thought, this is why I joined. This is what I remember the most as being one of the more interesting things.
Well, I mean, yes, I don't know if anyone particular sticks out. I mean, I told you I traveled all over the world, so being to go to some places that I never thought I would have, like, the Pakistan Afghanistan border, or deep into the Middle East when and walking through Jerusalem during the Intifada, and seeing the ancient ways that Jerusalem runs. It was always struck by walking past this little old lady selling dates, sitting a basket of dates on some street corner in Jerusalem. And I can just imagine that some version of that same little old lady has been selling dates on that street corner, for, thousands of years. And then here I am, the quote unquote modern day person that's, jet setting in and doing things from all over the world for a whole different reason of geopolitics. We're there doing certain things, working with the various governments and things like that. So yeah, there were times when, I was along for the ride someplace, or getting exposed to a bit of intelligence that no one else or a very, very select few in the world even knew. And that would be one of the instances where this is really something that is why I joined up to do this in the first place. When I was hired in, the agency was really looking for the all-American men and women who can pass a polygraph, and so I was going in for God and country and all that. It's a little different nowadays. They're looking for different skill sets depending on the roles, with different backgrounds. But I did it coming right out of college, and so got exposed to some pretty interesting things that I never expected, would happen for a kid from California.
Yeah. And when you say travel, I mean, you've gone to many countries, and I think the biggest, most important thing is you didn't pay to go to all those countries. Anybody can pay to go to all these places, but you got paid to go.
I got paid to go to
check it out.
places that most, a lot of people wouldn't want to go to, but there were some that were and there was always a little, it would be a real long trip, and we'd try and build in a day to relax here and there. So, there's not necessarily sightseeing, but you can see a little bit of what's going on. But mostly it was just a lot of hard work going to some difficult places.
All right, I have another viewer question. This one's from Andy.
Okay,
There's
Andy?
ongoing debate about government transparency versus national security. What's your perspective on the citizen's right to classified information?
Well, I definitely believe that in certain cases there is a right for, or an expectation that the government is going to be forthright and forthcoming with some information. There are ways to do it through the Freedom of Information Act and things like that. But I'm also strongly believe that some things are classified for a reason, and they're being disclosed could put, lives in danger, assets in danger, resources in danger, can ruin very critical projects, programs, classified activities. So it's definitely a balance. Again, I don't come from a conspiracy theorist background, so I'm comfortable with what's classified remaining classified until such time as it's no longer a threat to operations or people. Then it's okay. We can pull back a little bit and share some of what's going on for historical research and things like that.
I don't know if it's because of the internet or just the culture today, but I feel like there's a lot more leaks lately as to people being undercover, and then maybe a person in Congress revealing it and things like that. I mean,
There
does that seem?
definitely are, and that's a very good point. Again, back in my day, there was no internet, and so I mean, you literally, if you were going to take classified information out, this is back in the day of the little spy cameras and things like that to take pictures, and everything wasn't on a floppy disk, a thumb drive or something like that, and easily to be taken out. So, and you didn't have like, WikiLeaks and things like that, where people are getting the information, downloading it to a web page that then is immediately accessible by the entire world. So that is a very difficult. I'm very thankful that in my career I've never had full cyber security responsibilities, because that's, that the vulnerabilities there and the ability for someone to do damage by leaking classified information and do it so quickly, and in a tremendous volume, is I think, a threat to national security.
Do you think that any of the leaks, let's say over the last, I don't know, 20 years, have caused the deaths of any agents?
I'd be surprised if not. And don't know if I could put my fingers on one right now, but I know that there were operational things that were leaked, that Julia Assange, I think, and some of these others leaked. There's a one person that was put in jail. I can't remember their name, but I would not be surprised at all you know, if some of these leaks have led to the loss of assets that were working, you know, on behalf of the agency, foreign nationals that were working on our behalf, and the program got blown up, and then they get wrapped up by the host government and never seen again.
Yeah. How do you feel about all that?
I mean, I would feel terrible about it if it was happening to assets of mine, people that you're trying to recruit, and you're encouraging them to provide information that's beneficial to us at great risk to them, and then through no fault of your own operational security, somebody else down the line, gets access to it and leaks it out. I'd feel terrible about something like that.
Yeah. And so after the CIA, you go into global security on an executive type level. What does that mean? And how did your CIA training play into that?
Well, so what happened was I was 10 years in or so, and the world was changing. So, as I mentioned, I was a Cold Warrior at the beginning, in the mid 80s. And by the time mid 90s roll around, the Soviet Union had fallen, and, terrorism was starting to ramp up. The agency was actually looking kind of not like what's happening now, where there's this wholesale, we're trying to cut government employees. They were trying to redefine what their mission was and downsize a little bit. And one of my last assignments is I had been embedded in a defense contractor as an agency person in a defense contractor, understanding the challenges that they had with the classified program specific to agency work. And then I'd left that and became their quote unquote client, where what I was putting to use what I learned and trying to make the program better. And those individuals, there was an understanding that that company couldn't hire me, but they left to another company. And then they reached out and said, hey, it's time to take your talents to the private industry. And at that point, I had to make the decision, am I in for the duration? I was in for 10 years already. Am I going to go all the way to retirement, or do I take the skill sets I've learned now and apply it in the private world, in the corporate world, quite frankly, for a little bit more money? And I had some challenging, intriguing opportunities to do that, and I did. It was easily the most gut-wrenching decision I ever made, was to leave the agency. But in hindsight, it's worked out pretty well.
Yeah. I've noticed from interviewing some other people who've had these sort of jobs where you're in the trenches with other people. Do you have any friends from your time in the CIA that's left over because of that?
Well, yes and no. I mean, a lot of my friends finished their careers there, but as you can tell by the gray hair, I've been at this quite a while. So most of them are now retiring out. But yeah, there were those of us that left and went into the corporate world. At what time, I had the senior security role at General Motors. Another agency buddy of mine had just oddly had the top security role at Ford, another one at Microsoft. So there were a few of us out there that had, left the agency and worked our careers up to the top security roles in a number of, very large companies. And then I still had friends that were inside, and, we exchanged information from time to time for the last 30 years.
Is there much difference between government intelligence work and corporate security? I assume
No,
there's probably
no. Matter of fact, I mean, I had in almost every corporate gig I did after I left the agency, I would establish an intelligence team. In one of my last ones, I had an entire, we called it the Global Security Intelligence Center. I had analysts 24/7 sitting in a room with a wall of monitors, monitoring the world and what's going on to be able to report to me in the middle of the night if there's a coup in Indonesia. How does that affect any either operations that we have there or tier one suppliers that that are there? If there's a earthquake in Mexico City, how many corporate travelers do we have, and what hotels are they, and can we reach out to them to see if they're okay? If a plane went down, did we have anybody on board it? So just based on my background, I would build an intelligence unit in every company I work for, and I still do that. And because the threats are the same, the executive protection type threats are the same. It's just not nation state actors targeting executives. It could be there's some corporate espionage that you worry about. So you worry about that. And then as far as executive protection goes, it changes from nation state type things or terrorist type things to, unfortunately, the world that we live in now, somebody's not happy with their health insurance. They attack and kill the CEO of a health insurance company or something like that, where you have an employee that's upset about, I was in the aerospace industry for a while and I was in automotive for a while. And you get people that either employees, that are disgruntled and want to take it out and threaten key leadership, or a customer who thinks that they've been wronged in some way and they are unstable enough to want to attack senior leadership of a company or whatnot. So a lot of the skill set that was developed over a decade in the agency was easily transferable and highly sought after in the security world. And that's what led to my career progression in the corporate world.
Neat. And so you've written a book. You've written,
I have.
maybe you've written the second one. I know it's coming out later, but why did you decide to do this?
So it was in 2023. I had given myself a goal. I'm a voracious reader, and I'd given myself a goal to read 100 books. And I was doing some deep cuts. I did, Old Man in the Sea, and so I was and Moby Dick and Dracula, and then all genre fiction. I'm a big fan of obviously thrillers and adventures and things like that. And the family had always been after me to knowing that my wife and I were ex-agency, and they'd always been after me to write a book, but I was never going to write a memoir. That's not my type of thing. But one of the authors I really got into reading, he had a long series of books, but one of his books was a nonfiction talking about his career going from a Marine to a truck driver to a novelist. And that kicked off in my mind. So, that's maybe what I do rather than writing a memoir that, I was nobody special and it wasn't, there's not much there. Let me write a CIA thriller loosely based on some of my assignments, the protagonist having the same type of career background and assignments that I did, and loop in Easter eggs for the family. So the whole story about how the protagonist meets his wife and all that is how we did it, and the wedding and that kind of stuff. And then the assignments were assignments that I had. And I looped the story. The book it's right up back up here. It's called Admit Nothing. And it talks about a protagonist who was in the office of security. His career is off the rails for certain family reasons. And he discovers the chief of station in Bangkok ends up dead, and through investigating that, he stumbles upon the potential of a KGB mole being in the agency from the early 80s, and all of which tracks to true agency events. This was the Vitaly Yurchenko double defection. Some of your people may recall that a KGB officer defected to the agency and then redefected back out of it, and so that becomes a plot point into my story. And I've littered it, like I said, with Easter eggs for the kids to find about not only just about Beth and I and our relationship, but then assignments that I was on and things like that. And much to my surprise, it has kind of taken off and done very well. I expected it to sell, 3 copies to people all with my same last name. And it's doing very well to the point where book two is hung up right now, but book 2 is being reviewed at the moment, and Hopefully I'll be releasing it sometime soon.
And what's book 2 called?
Book 2 is called Deny Everything. And I've got a unique challenge that any of your audience members that are interested in writing would likely not have, is even though I've been out of the agency for 40 years now, or so, 30 at least, I'm still bound by the secrecy agreements I signed when I was in, which means that any manuscript, now if I write a cookbook, not a problem. But if I'm going to write genre fiction, espionage fiction, I have to send my manuscript to what's called the Central Intelligence Agency Pre-Publication Classification Review Board. And they sit there and look at they read the entire manuscript and say, nope. And they send it back with redactions. Now, obviously, I'm not going to write about anything that I know is classified. I put some things in there just for realism. Like one of the things in the book is I write about things that are true. I take you on, as the protagonist is walking through the agency headquarters, I'm talking, this is what it looks like down this hallway. And this is what's found in the CIA museum. And this is the bubble outside that we call the bubble, the auditorium. And over here is the Nathan Hale statue. So I talk about everything that really happens, that's really there at headquarters. And so they want to look at that to make sure that I'm not giving away anything that's classified. And they were making redactions. And one or two things I thought that had been declassified and weren't. So I changed those. They apparently pulled my personnel file, and some of the things that the protagonist in my story is doing must have been a little too close to my actual background. They said, change this, change that, which I did. Then they made me redact some things that are I completely made up. In one instance, the protagonist is up on the 7th floor of the CIA headquarters outside the director's office in the command post, and the conversation is going on, and the protagonist is saying something along the lines of, he stood up from this desk in the knee well of which I knew there to be an M7 rifle or whatever it was that I said. I completely made that up, and they made me redact it. And I thought, well, I've been gone 30 years. Maybe there is a rifle in that knee well now, I just happened to stumble upon it. So I was like, okay, fine, I'll change that.
How did he know about that rifle?
Yeah, exactly. So my problem right now is, and they did that with book 1, they made redactions, and then I was able to publish. Book 2, I sent the manuscript to the review board, and they've had it now for almost 10 weeks. And then will give me my redactions back, and I'll be able to publish book 2 in the near future.
Yeah, right. So if somebody is interested in getting into intelligence work, maybe with the CIA, maybe with another agency, what advice might you give them?
Well, obviously be well-rounded. Again, I think that the days are long gone when I joined, like I said, when they're just looking for the all-American men and women that can, get through the screening process. You need to have some additional, again, depending on if you're looking for, operational type intelligence work, not just support work at the agency. But so if you had multiple languages or another language, I took enough Spanish where I can order a beer in Tijuana, things like that, but I'm certainly not conversant. Having lived and worked overseas, regardless of where, would be helpful. Obviously, a strong inclination towards analysis and reading and being able to comprehend the complexity of what's going on. And then it's much easier as far as finding the right avenue to apply your interests than it did in my day. No longer you have to worry about pulling a folder off a wall. You can go on right now. The agency has a very robust website now with every type of position that they're looking for, where you can get in and look at it and understand and see what the roles and responsibilities, what the challenges are. I think they're very upfront about, this is going to be an overseas assignment, or this is going to be, X, Y, and Z. So you know what you're getting into, kind of going into it. It'd just be basically doing your homework, understanding that it's not James Bond, running around, doing all that kind of nonsense. It's important work, it's difficult work, and for the right people, and you're not going to get rich doing it. That's another thing we all have to understand, that it's can be, in a lot of cases, it's more of a calling than anything else. that it's something you really have to be interested in wanting to do.
Yeah. And this may sound like a dumb question, but do you think there's anybody that is running around out there like in a James Bond type situation?
Well, there's a bunch of nutcases that are doing it, and they're pretending to be, you know, agency or MI5 or whatever. Yeah, I mean, there are people that are, no kidding, you know, out there fighting the bad guys, however you want to define that. And in some cases, they're very dangerous situations. So, but those are extremely small. Like in the military, we have X number of millions of people in the military, but the true ones that are in harm's way are always filtered down. The funnel is very big, and then it gets down. It's the same thing in the intelligence world. It's a big funnel with lots of roles and responsibilities, and those that are really down there doing that are in harm's way of being rolled up by a host government or something like that for something it's difficult and it's possible, but it's a very, very small percentage of the people that are actually out there doing that kind of work.
And you said that you are allowed to tell some family members. Now, you were trained on how to not reveal classified information or really how to not reveal that you are a CIA employee. Did the family members that knew have any type of training just from you, perhaps, as to how
No,
not to reveal these
it's
things?
basically keep your mouth shut type. It's very basic. Don't talk about it. Don't tell anybody. It's called plausible deniability. So if somebody were to mention it, I'd have people come up. I mean, a lot of them thought I was FBI because at one point when I was doing background investigations, I had credentials that said I was a background investigator, not for the agency, for the cover organization. But people don't hear that. They just immediately assume you're FBI. It's like, all right, we'll just let them live with that for a while. Let them think that that's what it was. And so you kind of work around that. And if someone that knew I was agency slipped and then brought somebody else that would say something, that I had a way to say, oh no, they got that wrong. I'm not agency. Now, I had to dance around a few things, like I said, with why is the director of CIA at your wedding? We talked a little bit about Iran-Contra. When Bill Casey died, I was part of that protective detail, and it was all in the news. And so people were seeing me on the news outside of his house, and I had to come up with, why were you at the CIA director's funeral? And I had to come up with a cover story as to why my unit of whatever. Most of my covers were somehow related to civilian parts of the government, the Department of the Army, Office of so and so type thing, and I'd come up with a plausible story, plausible deniability of why I was where I was.
Yeah.
And
So the fake jobs
yeah.
that you had, what were some of the fake jobs that
Well,
can
I
you
can't tell you
let?
specifically what they were, but like I said, they were mundane sounding. The Department. I'll make one up. Department of the Navy, Office of the, you know, Keeper of the Gadgets or something like that. So there was some random sounding job that gave you enough plausibility as to this is why I'm there. And then the problem would be, especially in Washington D.C. area, everyone works for the government. You'd meet somebody at a party, and my cover story was that I worked at the Pentagon, even though I didn't. And they said, "Well, let's meet at so and so place in D ring of the Pentagon." And I'd have to always say, "Oh, I'm sorry, I'm not there this week," or you work your way around those type of situations.
Well, they probably think you're a spy at that point. Like, hey, wait a minute.
Yeah, yeah. Why isn't he here at the Pentagon every day when he says he is? But yeah, so you would work around those type of things.
Yeah. So, so if somebody is in government employment right now, maybe in intelligence, maybe not, and they're thinking of going into corporate security, is there anything that you might tell them?
Yeah, and there are organizations that there is a lot more cross communication and cooperation between government agencies and the corporate security world now. There are organizations, one's called the International Security Management Association, where there are actually government people embedded in our organization that are invited to help us coordinate, whether it's the FBI or Secret Service or Homeland Security or agency or NSA or whatever. So, if you have the opportunity to attend some cross-functional organizations between private industry and government, that's a good way to start making contacts. Everything that exists now that didn't exist back in the day, like LinkedIn and things like that, where you're making the contacts and the connections in the corporate world before you're ready to go. And then there are plenty of job boards and all that where in many cases guys like me in the corporate world now are looking for certain people with certain skill sets either out of the military or intelligence. Now we all kind of tend to, FBI, if you're the head of security and you're former FBI, you're reaching into your FBI network. I would reach into my agency network. Secret Service people reach into their network. Local police and military reach into theirs. But it's basically just, having the build through opportunities like social media and LinkedIn and other organizations to make connections, and then understand that it's a whole new world out there in the corporate world compared to government. And with very, very few exceptions, you're not going to step from any government agency right into the chief security officer role at a Fortune 10 company. You need to be able to take your credibility and what you've learned in the government and apply that to the corporate world, and then move up in increasingly, greater responsibilities in your roles, and then, work your way up. Like I didn't step out of, 10 years in the agency and lead General Motors. That's not the way it works. It took me another 20 some years before I moved all the way up to the senior ranks that I'm in now.
All right, Scott. It's been amazing. I never thought I'd even have a conversation with CIA agents and corporate security gentlemen. This has been fantastic.
Well, I really appreciate, I've enjoyed the conversation. I've enjoyed your podcast. I've gone back and looked at a number of your previous guests, and I've learned a lot. There's been some really interesting conversations, and I really appreciate the opportunity to come on and speak to you guys about some of my background. I hope some of it was interesting, both in the agency, the government days, and then now my early author journey into the publishing world.
I think your books sound cool. I'm going to check them out. Admit Nothing, Deny Everything, whenever they finally release that one for you.
Yeah, hopefully that is up for pre-order now. They're all available on Amazon, both in paperback, ebook, hard copy, hardcover, and audiobook now. And
Did you read it?
What's that?
Did you read it? Did you do
No,
the
I
audio?
did. I did not do the voice work for it. I had a trained voice actor doing the work.
Yeah.
He did a really nice job. And then, book 2 is available for pre-order and hopefully will be out in the spring.
All right. We'll look for it. Thanks a lot, Scott. We'll talk to you later.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.